There we go.
Live. Welcome, listeners, to today's episode of the Black Business Roundtable. I am your host, Doug Blacksher, broadcasting to you live from the city of Diversity, Oakland, California. We're going to continue our series on our health, but focus this week on pediatrics, so parents, educators, staff, and those working with children in any way this podcast is for you. It is now fall and cold and flu season is here, but further complicated by COVID 19. We have another prominent physician here to help educate on how we can navigate this pandemic for our children. And as always, our special thanks to our sponsor, Magnolia Engineering and Construction, for their continued support. And we congratulate Tammy Willis on her continued industry accomplishment. Visit her website at magnoliaengineeringandconstruction.com. Just a side note, she was at a mixer yesterday and made some great contacts, and she is making a difference with women breaking into an industry that is non-traditional to people of color and specifically Black women. Congratulations, Ms. Willis. Keep doing your great job out there making a difference. Today's show highlights politics, children, and politics, children, and the pandemic here in the Bay Area, which we may be in a reflection of other communities, both locally and nationally. Today, we welcome an esteemed physician and member of the medical community right here in the Bay Area. Last week, we focused on adults, and today, we will concentrate on the medical news and pediatric health. Our guests include our guests today include our weekly check-in with Dr. Ashley Coleman, Doctor of Psychology, Department Chair, Assistant Professor of Psychology at University of the West. Welcome, Dr. Ashley.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
Attorney Janani Ramachandran, Esquire, pronounced Janani Ramachandran, here to give us the latest news affecting our children and the continued struggle our community faced during not only COVID-19, but cold and flu deficits in local health care access. Dr. Calvin Wheeler is a medical director for a large undergraduate and graduate medical education program in Northern California. He has served as a clinical faculty member at several medical schools and works in equity, inclusion, and diversity sphere. Now, for the national political highlight, Val Demings. She's running for 2022 Florida Senate seat. She's a former Orlando police chief seeking to unseat little Marco Rubio. Little Marco, pack your little bags, and put your little tennis shoes on and run up out of there. Be sure Rubio in Florida, as he continues to fail Floridians at every turn. Be sure to register to vote. Let's flip this seat and let Val Demings, former police chief, escort him back home. Val Demings for 2022 Senate, her tagline is never tired. Election date, November 8th, 2022. And now for the news of the day. Dr. Ashley, please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. So, on this day in 1963, hundreds of Black Selma residents attempted to register to vote, but were met by state and local officials who used stalling and intimidation tactics to deny them that right, and violence against supporters attempting to give them food and water as they waited in line. As this day has been deemed Freedom Day, 350 Black residents of Selma bravely lined up at the county courthouse, risking their livelihoods and attempted to register to vote. And again, the registrars, we've heard this before in recent news, but intentionally slowed down the proceedings, limited registration to only a few people every hour, ensuring that only a small handful of those waiting in line would be able to register. Sheriff Clark, his deputies, and supporters forbade Freedom Day participants from leaving the line to eat, drink, or use the restroom. At 12:30 p.m., a group of 40 state troopers arrived and assisted local law enforcement in intimidating the Freedom Day participants. Again, because those waiting in line were unable to leave the line to eat or drink or to attend to their biological needs, as people tried to bring them food and water, those supporters and organizers were beaten. And again, voter suppression, as I'm discussing an event, unfortunately, that took place in 1963, we know that this has been a theme of discussion in certain states. And so we want to encourage all of our listeners to vote, as it is a right and something and a privilege that our ancestors have had to fight for. Again, this news, as of always, is courtesy of the Equal Justice Initiative. You can read more about this experience or other historical moments by visiting calendar.eji.org. Want to say a special thank you to those that fought for our rights to vote. Oh, you're on mute.
Once again, Dr. Ashley, you make all news sound like good news. Next up, our weekly check-in with our, once again, very own Dr. Ashley Coleman, Doctor of Psychology. Please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. So hello to our listeners and welcome to the Therapeutic Thursday segment. Here we are starting off October, and we are right there preparing for that holiday season. Many of us have probably settled into either working from home or returning back to the office, sending our children to school, and also just, I would say, just deliberating on some very big decisions. As you know, we had our physician sisters that were here last week that gave us some informative news about the vaccine and also about just having discussions about preparing for the holidays. This week, I'm thinking about our children in schools. And as many of you may have heard, there was a shooting in Texas at a high school. And we're thinking about COVID protection. Gavin Newsom recently declared that he is going to require vaccinations for all students K through 12. So now is a great time. The stress ball, it's also Thursday night football, and you have your stick. Now is a great time to really think about strategizing and thinking of the stress management, making some very big decisions that are on the table. What about vaccination for the children or what are rights? What about some school decisions? What's going to happen for the holidays? I'm back, Doug, and working clinically, and I'm hearing again the what ifs, the concerns, the anxieties about the future. And I think one of the things that we can do, and it's understandable that people want to plan, but again, there's so many unknowns. And so thinking about how to get a support system. I'm going to say this now. I think you've been a great champion of therapy, Doug, and you've brought this up weekly. And I'm also going to continue to reiterate this. Now is a great time to go to therapy if you've never been, or to return to therapy for a booster session if you need to. There are sliding scale therapists. That means that there are some therapists that will reserve spots for you to be able to pay based on your income. Even if a therapist does not accept insurance, there can be reimbursement through them filling out paperwork for you at the end, in order for you to take that back to your insurance to seek reimbursement. Doug?
I'm glad you brought the pay up because you, as well as all the other doctors of psychology, earn your pay. Also, I found out if you have been a victim of a crime
Mhm.
or a victim of a robbery or someone died, can you elaborate on that a little bit? They have funds, federal, state. I'll let you elaborate on that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
no, absolutely. Victims of a Crime is a state funded program that actually pays for therapy, an improved amount of sessions to help with rehabilitation. That was a part of my early work as a clinician. For instance, as you mentioned, if you're a victim of a robbery or other threat, I've had survivors of domestic violence have their treatment paid for through Victims of Crime, survivors of other traumas. And it's a wonderful program that I think is actually untapped a lot. So it's one of those hidden gems. I'm glad you brought it up, Doug. And so, for instance, they may say at the outset, we'll pay for 26 sessions, which is typically 6 months of treatment or half a year. However, during that time, if your therapist determines that you could benefit from more treatment, then you can actually apply for an extension. So I've worked with clients that have had received 52 weeks, so a full year of treatment paid for. Now's a great time to be well. I think that is the theme of our show. I know we focus on Black businesses and businesses of our allies and thriving, but we have to be whole people, right, in order to be successful. And so thinking about what does that mean, taking care of your body, taking care of your mind, taking care of your immune system, taking inventory of what are some things you can let go of. We don't talk enough about that. What are the taking inventory, for instance, of relationships? This pandemic, these 18 months, probably have clarified for many people who they've been caring for, who's been caring for them, which relationships are reciprocal, which ones may be draining. Now is a great time to take inventory of those. Okay. Looking at physical health, of course, will be Dr. Wheeler will be elaborating on pediatric health. Um, but again, just now we've done spring cleaning, we're in fall, we're heading into the holidays, but it's great. It would be a great time to one, finish the year strong, which is one, we want to be grateful to be alive, right? To be well in the times of threats of COVID, but also just thinking, what can we do differently to take care of ourselves? And that doesn't mean that that may 100% prevent things from happening, but how can we maintain and just really nurture ourselves? Um, and so, what's one thing of self care you can do today? I can disclose that I scraped up my pennies, um, but also received a gift card that I'm finally going to use for a massage. I don't always have that money, be transparent, for a massage. Self care doesn't have to be luxurious, but in being sedentary and teaching online and now doing clinical work online, it's important for me to take care of this vessel. So if it's not walking, aromatherapy, pouring into yourself spiritually, just thinking of what can you do to be kind to yourself today, and just take that load off, because we've been carrying it for quite some time.
Dr. Ashley, you know, I just started doing this show about 5 months ago, and I've done construction. I've worked for big corporations, and I have panic attacks sometimes. I have
Hmm.
anxiety.
Hmm.
But since working with this show, working on this show, and listening to you, and I previously I've talked to a psychologist, but you have given me so much anxiety relief.
Mhm.
And, I used to hide my little stress stick, but now I keep it right here and hand in hand.
Mhm.
And also, I'd like to say the gentleman who I recommended Get Health,
Mhm.
he was diagnosed, and his name's not, so I don't have to worry about it, but he was diagnosed with PT, post traumatic
Stress
disorders.
disorder. Mhm.
Can you say that for our audience?
Sure. So, post traumatic stress disorder is a mental condition that consists of when someone has either survived a traumatic event, or it can even be vicarious. It can be through learning that a loved one or someone else survived a traumatic event. That can include symptoms such as flashbacks, so having recollections, memories, or nightmares of the event, and also having experiencing a visceral reaction. So, this can be sweating, this can be nausea, this can be heart racing or panic like symptoms when they are exposed to either around the event, around the person, or see something that mimics that. Right, that can be those feelings. And so what can happen is it can trigger the body into a fight response, a flight response, wanting to flee, avoid, a freeze response, or even a freak out response. And so it's just really important. Treatment is available. And I just want to note, just being an Oakland native, and PTSD is largely tied to, combat veterans. But there have been studies that talk about the trauma of surviving the inner city neighborhoods. And I really want to recommend parents, especially right now, what's happening in Oakland. We know violence is up uh, nationwide. But I really want to encourage parents to check in with your children if they're having headaches or stomach aches, they don't want to go to school, they're having difficulty with their memory and concentration. And anytime there's avoidance for children or teens, we want to tap in and ask some questions. Something may be going on at school. Maybe if they're having night sweats, if they're soiling the sheets or whatnot, these are also signs and symptoms of PTSD, largely in children and adolescents. So we want to ask some questions. What's going on? Are you afraid of anything? Um, you know, Thinking of what your children are watching, how they may be responding. Does this remind you of anything? So especially with what's going on. So inner city violence can definitely be, and we can have complex trauma as well. So multiple sources or chronic trauma over time.
Dr. Ashley, just when the show came on, the screen went off. I had a hot flash.
Mm.
So I grabbed my stick and I thought about what you said in the past shows. I only had 20 seconds. I said, okay, put your problems on that pedal. And it floated away. And I don't know if you noticed earlier, little forehead started perspiring. So, audience, let me be clear. Stress, anxiety,
Mhm.
depression
Mhm.
leads to drug use, alcoholism, and
Mhm.
suicide.
It
And
can.
not only for adults, but for our kids.
Mhm.
That this show is going to be surrounded about talking about today, the not only the medical, but doctor, if you can interject so often, and having a mental breakdown and anxiety and depression can cause physical ailments. Until our Janani comes on, can you talk a little bit about how, like you said, the headaches, the
Oh, yeah.
sweats, the sore? Could you talk about that a little bit, please, Doc?
Sure. I'm really passionate about the mind body connection and teaching clients and just individuals just to recognize that. I think many of our headaches and stomach aches, and for many ethnic minorities, they actually experience psychological symptoms, have, again, physical manifestations. So, for instance, for Spanish speakers, sometimes they talk about ataque de nervios. So they don't say panic attacks, but they say ataque de nervios. And ataque de nervios that can be nausea, stomach cramping, heart palpitations. So again, you make my nerves bad. Ooh, you on my last nerve. You're stressing me out. Whatever cultural sayings there are, but what we're really saying is there's stress. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm at my capacity. You're on my last nerve. Well, we need to kind of chime into what is it? Where is this buildup happening? And as far as what can increase our vulnerability for development of medical conditions, again, even though I'm not a physician, I can talk about just risk factors of chronic stress. They'll say that, the vulnerabilities of cardiovascular disease. If someone is coping the best way they can through substance use, that can lead to complications, cirrhosis of the liver, other complications if someone is smoking or using drugs. That can lead to a variety of complications. Some people binge eat, that can lead to possible increased vulnerabilities of diabetes and other types of illnesses. And more importantly, over time, the more traumatized a person is and the less relief that they have, it can make life feel like it's not worth living, because anytime you're traumatized or re-traumatized and there's no relief. But there is treatment out there. There are seeking safety, which helps people heal from PTSD as well as substance use. There's cognitive behavioral therapy. There's cognitive processing therapy as a way to retell one's story. If someone is experience intimate partner violence or sexual trauma. But we really I want to highlight, as do you, I know, Doug, and underscore that there is help out there. And so really want to check in with our babies. I have some friends that are, for instance, a social worker at a local hospital in the Bay Area, and she makes social media posts where she talks about what children or the, adolescents are coming in with: vaping, coming in with, we know that weed is laced, so we have fentanyl overdoses we need to be concerned about, and certain substances that people wouldn't believe are available to get in babies' hands, right? Our youth's hands. But it's true, PCP use is up again in our community. Heroin use is up in our community, in the Black community, in the Bay Area, in San Francisco. I know that heroin has sometimes been just described as a drug that white people use. That's not the case. It is actually in the inner city, in addition to Percocets, which we know are also opiates. So there are some things we need to be asking questions, looking at pills or what looks like candy, and really getting a sense of what our babies, what our youth are maybe afraid to talk about.
And I'm glad you brought that up, the drug and the different types of drugs, because one of the things I remember when crack came up and the other types of drugs in the Black neighborhoods and communities, and it was an epidemic. It was crime. But when the what is that drug that white kids were on, the can't think of it off the top of my head, the methamphetamine.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, then it was oh well, it's a problem. They're just sick. So let me be clear: any drug, methamphetamine, crystal, dust, heroin, cocaine, any of that, it's a social issue and it's an epidemic issue, and it needs to be treated like it's a medical issue. Thank you, Dr. Ashley. I think we're still waiting on Janani. Well, let me go back to the gentleman who I referred to, and I said he was diagnosed. One of the things we're going to, next week, we're going to have on our show a gentleman who's gone through a traumatic experience with law enforcement. He's going to be on our show with his attorney. He's out of Texas. And I'm going to talk briefly about it until our guests come on, Janani. But he was purchasing a vehicle, and he took cash with him, because I had to question, why would you carry that amount of cash? It was quite a bit of cash. So he was pulled over by the police, Black guy in Texas with a large amount of cash on him, pulled over by law enforcement in I'm going to hold off on the name until I'm really dying to tell it. But anyway, the police pulled him over, did a first off, didn't have authorization to check his vehicle. Checked his vehicle, and he pointed out that the light over the license plate was not bright enough. So it went from that to handcuffing him, putting him in the back of the car, taking his money, and saying that there was drugs on it or something to that effect. And I'll let the attorneys come on and they're going to outline it. But this happened 2.5 years ago. 2.5 years ago. And they still kept his money. They haven't charged him with anything, and then they did charge him with something. Then they said they found coke on it. Then when they came and arrested him when he tried to get his money back, then they said we're arresting you for trafficking money. His attorney's gonna lay it out. But audience, let me be perfectly clear by saying this. Law enforcement, not all law enforcement, because we got some great officers out there. We got one running for Senate seat in Florida. So we have some great officers. But those law enforcement officers who choose to target Black people, you are causing post-traumatic, what's the name of it, Dr. Ashley?
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Post-traumatic stress disorder to a magnitude that you could push a person into doing drugs. You could push a person into getting drinking, having an alcohol problem. You can push a person to suicidal thoughts and things going on in their mind. So I humbly ask all law enforcement, starting from rank to file, think about the psychological damage that you're doing to African American men and women across this country. And I've had my own encounters, and the good thing about it is I went down to internal affairs and I took care of it. But a lot of people don't know that they figure if one bad cop, they got all bad cops. But that's not like that. It's your job, audience. When there's a bad cop, document it and hold them accountable. Because don't let one bad cop distort, taint, and shame the rest of those good cops out there who fight for us. In Oakland, and I'm rambling off, so take over when you want to, Dr. Ashley.
No, go ahead.
We were just talking prior to the show. There is a pandemic of killing, robbery. I think about a month or two ago, they had a picture, live videotape, and they put it on Facebook Live where somebody was breaking in. Did you know what I'm talking about?
I saw that on Lakeshore Avenue. Yeah. Oh.
Girl, I couldn't believe. And when somebody said something to him, he wanted to fight them as he was going through each car, smashing the window at 3:00 in the daytime, trying to robbing each car going down Lakeshore Avenue. Lakeshore is a very popular spot here in Oakland, one of the crown jewel areas in Oakland. But the point I'm making here is that we have great law enforcement here in Oakland. And we got a couple of bad apples, and they're working it out. We have a new chief here, Chief Armstrong, who had started in February. And I'm on a community policing advisory board, and I'm totally off script now. I'm waiting for our guest to come in. But last night, I'm a community policing advisory board member. And the Oakland Police Department, one of the deputy chiefs, put together a program where he's going to start sending the officers who patrol different neighborhoods to meet each community, whether it be business or in a neighborhood, and walk with at least 8 to 10 or 15 people in the community and pointing out, well, they sell drugs over there, and that happens from Friday night to Saturday morning, and over here they do the donuts. Department of Transportation, if they put the little spikes up or the little bumps in the road, that could prevent that. But start addressing the issues at the core, block by block. And I implore all you law enforcement out there, you can't solve the whole city at one time. But you start at the worst area, and it's like a wave. You just let it keep tripling out. Because our cities, and I've talked to Tamara, who's helping out on the show today, and she was speaking about how bad the crime is in Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know Dr. Ashley, you and I, we talk a lot, but I've already adopted Baltimore, Donnie Glover, and tomorrow, that's our sister city.
Mm-hmm.
And once we get things cleaned up here, both crime and economically, and what I mean by economically, economic development and labor development for people who look like you and I on the screen here. We're going to Baltimore and help them clean Baltimore up because Baltimore is a great city. I've had
It's a beautiful city. I enjoy Baltimore. I lived in DC for 4 years as a Howard University grad, so I definitely made it to Baltimore, and I was, um, we could talk about the histories of Oakland and Baltimore, the similarities of being port cities and also being two cities that had thriving Black neighborhoods, but that were also targeted in communities with drug use that decimated the city. So in Baltimore, I was struck by the number of methadone clinics
right,
that are there, and how heroin has impacted that city. And again, the people are beautiful and resilient, and
right,
there is life after substance use. You can rebuild yourself, similarly as you mentioned in Oakland with the crack epidemic there, but it takes decades to do that.
right.
And again, unfortunately, where Oakland is up 30 homicides more than where they were last year, when we think
Exactly.
about who's dying, um, the activities, the gentrification, the threats and loss of job loss, youth feeling like they may not have any futures. This feels very much, unfortunately, like Oakland, just kind of a wave that was happening in the early 2000s. So we really have to, if we love our city, it's going to be us, the people that love the city, that want to clean it up, but also involves us having some really, really tough conversations about what we do with our youth, how to encourage them, and really just also um, how what steps we can take to really again just preserve what's there. You know, Doug, I'm going to take some time to acknowledge our sponsors, and then we can continue on as we get ready for Dr. Wheeler to really educate us. But again, we do not take this platform for granted. Thank you, Mr. Donnie Glover, Black USA News, blackusa.news and bemorenews.com for this wonderful platform where we get to discuss, um, again, the issues that are most important to us and what our listeners care about as well. Please be sure to tune in to Sister Biz with Nicole and Tamara. I checked it out last night. Got a chance to really hear a great discussion, um, regarding, again, views of ethnic minorities from a variety of perspectives and in the neighborhood, and what it means also to have Black children but not be Black. There was just a lot there shared last night. Please also check out Black USA Crypto News with Kamal Hubbard on Fridays. And a special acknowledgement to Ms. Tammy Willis, owner of Magnolia Engineering and Construction. For more information on what she's doing in the trailblazing, please visit www.magnoliaengineeringandconstruction.com. We want to be part of growing with our community of beautiful Oakland, California. And also, we want to invite you to connect with Magnolia Engineering on all social media platforms.
Dr. Ashley, as always, you make any news, even even noting our sponsors, good news. you know, I have to look at and when the show first started, Dr. Ashley, I had Donnie Glover gave me an opportunity to host a Black Business Roundtable, and I thought it was a wonderful opportunity. And you constantly hear me giving you praise, and I have to because you, once again, just like a medical doctor, will get out there and do heart surgery, do remove bullets, especially when I say bullets, with all these shootings going on. What I mean, what can we say? And you're a doctor in psychology, so that's why I'm asking you. What can you say that would subtly but firmly and directly give those listeners out there? And once again, I pretty much point to African Americans because uh, even the guy who I recommended he go see a therapist, he initially he was very reluctant. Man, I don't need to go see. But talking to him this week versus talking to him last week, and I've even talked to his wife, and she said, "Wow, you have done a great, great, great thing for our family." So I can first only and just visualize how you do this on a daily basis, weekly and monthly basis. But how how can you reach out and say something that will continue? And we're going to hammer it. It's like a rock. We're going to keep chipping at it away. And our audience, if you're black or white, and if you're white, talk to black people and tell them therapy is okay. You're taking it because we know most white people do take therapy. Nothing, and that's not a black or white issue. That's a confirmed issue.
Mm-hmm.
But what can you say? And we're going to continue to say that would have our audience sharing this word that would not only strengthen their ability to deal with racism on the job, post stress it, you say it better than me,
A
uh,
post-traumatic stress
on the
disorder.
job, but and then strengthen the family, deal with their kids better. So let's make it a Dr. Ashley moment. Pitch regarding your services and all Doctor of Psychology services. I'm going to be quiet now. Go ahead, Doctor.
Okay. Um, Therapy is a place where we can um, mourn what we didn't get but deserved. Therapy is a place where we can sort out our values and figure out if it's time to pivot. More importantly, I try to listen when people tell me they haven't felt like themselves. And sometimes we're so in work mode and survival mode that we don't understand that we're just so focused on getting it done. We don't even realize that we've changed, but usually it's our loved ones that may notice that there's something different about us. So that could be something such as um, noticing our facial expressions not the same, or we don't sound the same. And for ourselves, kind of doing a scan, are there any sleep changes that you're experiencing? So just some kind of signs of curiosity to get a sense of something's going on. Are there sleep changes happening? Are there appetite changes happening? Are you noticing changes in your mood, either feeling apathetic, like I don't care, whatever happens, anger, feeling angry, feeling irritated. Sadness is something that a lot of people, to be honest, defend against. So sometimes when people are sad, it's not until they're in therapy or go deeper that they recognize that there's sadness there. Usually it may be anger, irritation, numbness. I don't feel anything. Again, when someone is having sleep changes, mood changes, and appetite changes, it's a really good time to check in with someone. And what we're doing, for instance, like at the private practice I work at, and also just in general, we have free consultations. So what we're doing now is we give people an opportunity. Yes.
Can you say the free part again? Because most of the
Yes.
time our people, it's like a free concert,
Right.
free two for
Right.
one. So say that free part again.
Absolutely. So we at the private practice where I work, we have free consultations, video consultations where you can check in. You can meet with a therapist for 15 minutes and get a sense to try on fit. How comfortable do you feel talking to this person? Do you feel heard? Do you feel judged? Um, what's your any questions you have about therapy? How do they respond to your questions? Are they patient and informative, or do you feel like I don't think I would really feel good working with this person? And so a lot more places are doing that. Just again, no strings attached. consultation to answer questions. And then typically there's a first session, or what we call an intake session, where we go into gather more information regarding your background, how long you've been feeling this way, and to get a fuller picture. So it's like a workup when you're first going to a doctor's visit, a physician. But when I talk to friends or people or anyone who's consulting about when's a good time to go to therapy, definitely, like I said, sleep changes, mood changes, appetite changes, and also any type of loss of value in something. For instance, if you have a hobby or an activity that usually would give you joy, and then all of a sudden, you don't get that same feeling from that activity, that's a big warning sign. We call that anhedonia, but a loss of interest. That's a major sign of depression. I love football and I love my basketball, and that's just a given, right? And so it's a great stress reliever for me. It's not a cure all. However, I know for me, if I were ever to watch a game, and I don't have to be ecstatic, but if I don't feel any type of elevation of mood, or being with my godchildren, or spending time with if I don't see that elevation of mood that I usually get, or that joy, that's something I'm like, what's going on with me? So again, any loss of energy, loss of concentration, any types of thoughts of hopelessness. What's the point? I don't really care if I wake up tomorrow morning. I wouldn't care if something bad happened to me. Those are warning signs of depression, but they're also, it means to call someone. It's time to check in with someone.
Dr. Ash, I just saw our guest is running a little late. He's probably, I'm sure, taking some kind of taking care of some kind of medical emergency. But Janani, she was called up in a meeting today. So we want to put her name out there again, because I do see her doing a lot of work politically. That's Janani Ramachandran.
Mm-hmm.
Graduate from Stanford University and graduate from Berkeley School of Law. We don't use Bolt anymore because we know why.
Mm-hmm.
But Janani Ramachandran, a 29-year-old up and coming civil rights and ethics attorney, trying to make a difference here in the Bay Area. Janani, if you're listening, I got you, sister. I threw that name out there, and I'm gonna throw it out there every week, because when I was working with her on her campaign, and just the genuine feeling of somebody who really wants to make a difference and not just increase their bank account number. So, what you said, from what I gathered, and I've said this in the past, and I'm going to continue to say this, Doctor. I wish so much that you were around back in the 80s, and you probably weren't even born back then, back in the 80s and the 90s, when I had to go to work. It became normal for me to accept the difference of treatment that I received than my white counterparts. Now, I'm going to say that slow again. The difference of treatment that I received from my white counterpart, and after several lawsuits, I found out they made 25 to 50% more than me too. So I was really angry. Oh, looks like our doctor is in the house.
Dr.
Well, let
Wheeler.
me wrap up what I was saying. Long and short, audience, just like you would seek out a dentist with a toothache, just like you would seek out a doctor if you had a broken leg, or you fell off a bike and skinned your knee, or broke a finger, seek out psychological help. It will help increase your health, and it will make the quality of your life much better. Dr. Ashley, would you, and I'm sure you can expand off that a few minutes until we get our guest situated here.
No, absolutely. There are free consultations out there. Also, an opportunity. I want to encourage our listeners to ask for any sliding scale services. If you have health insurance, ask for any in-network providers or ask about any reimbursement policy, procedures. But definitely now is a great time to look into mental health. If you are employed, look into any, again, behavioral health programs tied to your employment. Again, more employers are being pushed to consider well-being of their employees. So we want to take advantage of these opportunities to really nurture ourselves and give it a try. If it doesn't work the first time, just know you're meeting with a complete stranger. So we want to also temper our expectations with regard to what that first session can feel like. So it's a relationship that you're developing, and we know it takes time to develop trusting relationships. And again, also want to underscore the fact that many of us have been hurt before, we've been betrayed before, and so here's this person, so it may be hard to, maybe slow to warm up to give a stranger a try. But therapists are here to help. If it's a good fit, continue on. If it's
Right.
not a good fit, there are more out there. But you owe it to yourselves to try therapy. And so I hope that our listeners will pursue that if they find that it's useful, or and encourage a loved one to attend therapy. So, working with helping your loved one find a therapist. Someone can say, "Oh, I don't know where to start." Help them find someone they're comfortable with. Ask around. Um, Always can look at Psychology Today, the Association of Black Psychologists as well. Therapy for Black girls, therapy for Black men. So there's some wonderful resources out there.
And for our audience who do not understand the doctor's lingo, brothers and sisters, when you feel sick in the head, you could be dead by the time you figure it out on your own. For the brothers and sisters out there who go to work, dredging going to work because they know it's going to be some kind of BS going on at the job site,
Mhm.
go ask a friend. If you don't know someone, ask doctors usually can refer your medical doctor.
At the
Think,
the last referrals, the last few referrals I've received have come from primary care physicians. So absolutely, if you are in, again, if you go to your primary care physician, or even if you go to an urgent care or an emergency room, they are required to connect you and provide you with referrals. They may be county referrals. It may take some, elbow grease, roll up your sleeves, and make some calls. But just know that even if you can call your local community college and they have a department of psychology, they have referrals. So there are referrals all over for wellness.
wait a minute, can you say that again? You can go where now?
Absolutely. Even you can even call, your community college or local universities if they have a department of psychology. Even then, they have referrals. It's just important. And then also there are crisis hotlines. Let me make um, a plug for this while we, prepare for Dr. Wheeler. But you can text home to 741-741. That is a texting crisis text hotline. That's 24/7. There's also the Lifeline. And so the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which I believe is 1-800-273-8255, 1-800-273-8255. And so and then you can always go into your emergency room, local emergency room, and um, at times also call 211 if you're concerned about someone. In the Bay Area, just want to make a plug for this. While we know law enforcement isn't typically trained to respond to disturbances of mental health, just know San Francisco and other cities have actually assembled mental health teams to accompany and respond to calls for concerns of mental health disturbances, or need for mental health resources. So please reach out if you notice that someone around you, a loved one, isn't themselves. Just starting that conversation with, it just seems like you haven't been yourself lately. Is there anything that's been bothering you? I care about you. I love you. And I just want the best for you. And so there are many ways, just using language that's authentic, to reach out and check on your people.
Well, I got a message from the doctor. He's having a little problem with getting on the StreamYard. So he said he can do it on his phone. So, Doc, if you can do it on the phone, then I believe phone can do it too. So we'll let him work it out. And I want to get back to, so we can keep this party going. I want to get back to, since we're dealing with kids today,
Mm-hmm.
how can a parent, and I think you mentioned briefly earlier, with kids, what peeing in the bed, bad behavior, how can a parent identify signs that their children is starting to use drugs because they aren't venting, starting to drink alcohol because they're not venting, eating disorders? So
Mm-hmm.
can you go into that and tell our audience signs that they can look at to where you can save a kid's life? I heard
Mm-hmm.
suicide is up tremendously in the
Unfortunately.
in our young people now. Can you talk on that, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, suicide attempts and completions are up for children, adolescents, and adults. Um, the onset of depressive disorders, anxiety is up. I think one of the first things about children is that when children are withdrawn, is a number one warning sign, in addition to adults. But when children are withdrawn, unfortunately for our teachers, they have many children in the classrooms. Now they have the added pressure of COVID, trying to maintain their wellness, trying to socially distance and keep, their students socially distanced. And so misbehavior, or any type of misbehavior, can be seen as antagonistic and intentional, and not necessarily filtered through a cry for help. But any changes in behavior. So it's also important for our teachers to look at any withdrawn behavior, someone's um, decree, any loss of effort in academics is another big one. And then also, just I'll say this before we transition to Dr. Wheeler's bio, but also want to look at the friends that they're around, and any, again, changes in mood, because when someone is using substances, there's irritability. um, Again, effort, they may not be putting effort into sports, into academics, into wanting changing friends socially, changes in sleep. Those are some of the things that we see, as well as paraphernalia. So it's important for our parents to also be aware of what pills look like, and just to know that, to also keep their prescription medication locked in a safe place. Well, oh, go ahead, Doug. Oh, you're.
Because it's so important for specifically our African American parents to understand that. Can you say that one more time? Because sometimes our parents go, "Well, that's not how I was raised," and I used to do that. Um, uh, that's how I was. I wasn't raised like that. So, can you articulate that again so that our listeners, specifically those African American parents, can understand that even if you don't have the money and financial means to pay for it, there are programs that
Mm-hmm.
can help your child.
Mm-hmm.
And I use this because I'm Black and I've experienced this.
Mm-hmm.
You can save your child from getting shot from the police. You can save your child from having academic problems in school. You can save your child from being ridiculed by others because they have social disorders that aren't defined by, or excuse me, that are defined by the school, which are not qualified to make those type of evaluations on your child. You, Dr. Ashley, can do that.
Well,
So
I started in Oakland Public Schools. That was my first clinical position before. So absolutely, there are programs available to have where, I don't know if some of that funding has been cut, but I worked in elementary school primarily with Black and brown girls who were being deemed as behavioral issues, but that was not the case. Actually, they were survivors of neglect. And the program I used as group therapy in order to improve their self-esteem, but also to reduce the risk of sex trafficking and other things that were threats in the neighborhood. And it starts at home. So I think looking at the schools, and it's really also important for our teachers and administrators to look at behavior and be curious and not just immediately go to punishment and suspension of our students. We know that happens. And look at repair, look at support, and really give our young people a forum where they can disclose what's going on at home or what's going on um, with them internally and be met with support. And many of our students and children don't speak up because they're afraid. So I think while parents have due diligence and the need to discipline and however they feel fit, I think it's important to give your child an opportunity to share. And in that can create a pathway and a forum of dialogue where then trust can be built.
as always, Dr. Ashley, you sum up everything to where even a simple person like myself understands. So thank you. I have our guest on the phone,
Okay.
and he knows how important it is for us to educate our audience, specifically of the pediatrics. So he said that he's on the phone now, so I'm going to have him. We're going to ask a question, do everything off the phone. So to our valued audience, to our listeners, today I would like to welcome to the Black Business Roundtable Dr. Calvin Wheeler. Dr. Ashley, could you please read his bio? Because it is amazing. Thank you.
Absolutely. So Dr. Wheeler has served in healthcare leadership roles over the past 30 years. He attended Henderson State University in Arkadelphia. Was that Arkansas? And where he studied pre-med and pre-pharmacy. He then matriculated at the University of Michigan College of Pharmacy. After graduation, he obtained his California pharmacy license and attended the University of California Irvine College of Medicine. Completing medical school 6 months early, he completed a 6-month American Hepatic Foundation Fellowship at the Kings College Hospital on the liver failure unit, a unit in London, England. Wow. Then completed residency training in pediatrics at Boston City Hospital and Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. His residency was followed by a fellowship in pediatric neurology at Boston City Hospital and the Boston University Combined Neurology Program, where he also served as a clinical instructor. He then completed a fellowship in epilepsy, EEG, and the Houston Merit Fellowship in cerebral palsy at the Children's Hospital in Boston and Harvard Medical School, where he also served as a clinical instructor. After moving to the Bay Area, Dr. Wheeler became a clinical instructor at UCSF in the Department of Pediatrics and the Division of Neurology. His research interests have been in the area of anti-epileptic medications and alternative epilepsy treatments. Finally, he completed an advanced leadership program at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 1997, the California Healthcare Foundation Leadership Fellowship between 2003 and 2005. He has served on the Board of Trustees of the California College of the Arts for 20 years. Dr. Wheeler enjoys reading, walking, running, tennis, skiing, traveling, and spending time with his wife, Sarah Jane, with whom he co owns an art gallery and design business. Let's welcome Dr. Wheeler.
Welcome, Dr. Wheeler. How are you, sir?
Thank you, Douglas. I am blessed today, and thank you. And hello, Dr. Ashley. I can't see you at the moment, but I recognize your voice.
Well, let's light it up as only we know how on the Black Business Roundtable discussing cold and flu combined this season with COVID-19. Welcome, Dr. Calvin. I want to start by saying I appreciate you not letting anything stop you from making it on the show today. That's why you made it through med school and all the other wonderful and great accomplishments that you've done, because you find a way to make our day. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, if this was the first obstacle I had to get over, you're right. I wouldn't have been successful.
Well, let's get right into it. And I would like to start off by saying, on the show, we tried to show our audience, if you can see it, you can be it. But in this case now, if you can hear it, you can still be it. How about that?
There you go. That's good.
We want to encourage those in our community that they too can become the very professionals we speak with on our show. Can you give a brief background on your personal history regarding your family, friends, and the village that perhaps was around you as a youth that supported and encouraged you educationally? Thank you, Dr.
Absolutely. As stated in the introduction, I grew up in Arkadelphia, which is a very small town of about 10,000 in south central Arkansas. And actually the town I grew up in, or the community about 5 miles out, Gum Springs, was about 300 people. So a very small village. But grew up in a home and a family that was very much focused on education. My grandfather, my dad's side, actually had been a school teacher. My sister taught school for 50 years, and my older brother taught school. So I come from a family really of educators and teachers. But growing up, the first 5 years of school, I was in a 2-room schoolhouse where 1st through 4th was in one room, 5th through 8th was in a second room. So it was really, as I learned later, the first experience of open classroom setting. And as a result of that, I got to do 2 grades in 1 year, my 1st and 2nd grade years.
Wow.
And then at the end of 5th grade, the state closed down the rural schools and we got bused into town. And so on that transition, we were in a larger school setting with larger numbers of students and a homeroom. So my 6th grade year, there were 3 different homerooms for our 6th grade, whereas I had been amongst 3 people in 1st grade and about alone in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, and 5th because I was out of sync with the other group. So one of the things I would say growing up, every adult in our community and in our village had the equal oversight and responsibility as our parents. So if you got out of line or were seen doing something inappropriate, any adult in our community had the ability to reprimand us and or report to our parents. So that was one of the things that's very different then than today. The other thing is the teachers in our schools expected excellence and expected performance. And so if we started to decrease or not come up to par, the teachers would immediately get in touch with our parents who would have a discussion. So that's how important education was and how important the village was. And that persisted on through high school. When I graduated high school, there were 56 in my graduating class, and 48 of us went on to college after graduation. Wow. One of the other things I was really blessed to have had the opportunity to do was in 8th grade. I thought that those of us in my class who were interested in math and science, there was a requirement in Arkansas that you had to do at least 1 year biology of science in high school to graduate and 1 year of math. And I asked the math teacher and science teacher if they would design a curriculum for a group of us to do 9th through 12th year for math and for science, and they were both ecstatic to do that.
Wow.
And so we actually got a 4-year curriculum. On the science side, Mr. Blevins taught us physical science, chemistry, physics, and biology across the 4 years. And Mrs. Snowden taught us Algebra 1, Algebra 2, trigonometry, and calculus across the 4 years for math. So that was an amazing foundation that was established for later and graduate schooling.
Dr. Ashley, I don't know about you, but he lost me at 6th grade. So, Dr. Calvin, it is amazing to hear what steps you took to move things forward to make sure you are where you are today. Dr. Ashley?
Yeah, so Dr. Wheeler, I hear you, mentioning your love for math and science, and I know you can't see me, but I'm cheesing over here because I share that same love of math and science. But can you share with us what was your motivation to pursue medicine?
Yeah, so that's a really good question because, as you say, when you can't see it, you can't be it. And of course, growing up, I did not see any Black physicians in our community. And even the waiting rooms at the doctor's office were segregated when we were growing up as children. The colored waiting room was in the back part of the entrance to the building, and the white was in the front. But I had a love for math and science. And in fact, my project that I did in 11th grade for a project we had to do on what we were interested in, I actually did mine on aeronautical engineering. Another good friend of mine did his on pharmacy. And so we got to present our paper to the whole class. So we got to learn about all these different professions that the students were interested in. And so during the 12th grade year, the aeronautical industry was beginning to have layoffs and decrease employment. So I thought that wasn't the thing to go into. So I went and talked to the science instructors at Henderson State University and said, what was required for pre-pharmacy and pre-medicine, thinking that would be a way to apply. And I'd had a bad burn during my earlier year and transition from elementary to high school. So I had to go to the doc every week for several weeks. So I thought that would be an interesting area. And I loved people, loved children. So I decided to do pre-med and pre-pharmacy both at Henderson. And that was really what parlayed. When I transferred to the University of Michigan Pharmacy School, that was an eye-opening experience, a very large university. The College of Pharmacy is a smaller college within that university. So it was really an opportunity to grow and develop and see role models that were similar to yourself. I saw Black professors and administrative staff and business owners and people that were lawyers and judges, etc. So that was a real different experience, which said to me that I could do it as well. And so while there, my horizons broadened, and I went on and completed pharmacy school, but decided after that, immediately during my last year, that I would apply for medical school. So that was really the driver to move on to pursue medical school at that point.
Dr. Calvin, all I can say is it is a pleasure hearing you articulate all the things that you have done that have made you who you are, because there are a lot of young people who have the same thoughts that you had back then, but they're doing nothing with it now. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
What motivates you to remain dedicated to the field of medicine, especially with the pandemic still having a hold on our society and disproportionately so on Black and brown communities? Thank you, sir.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think of medicine, and for me, it is a calling. And when I talk to young physicians and young trainees today, I often have that as part of my presentation, is the fact that, it's very competitive to get into medical school, very competitive to get through it and finish. However, the commitment after you get through med school and to do residency training and fellowship training or whatever else required to do what you want to do, there is a calling that is higher and beyond all that you can imagine. At the end of medical school, we take a Hippocratic oath, and part of that is the one that people hear most commonly is first do no harm. And so you want to train and learn and study so that you can provide the very best care for any patient that you see. And of course, there are going to be some patients that you see where you don't quite understand or know all that they might need. And that's why we have consultations and we have specialists, people who can help in an area. And that really was part of my role as a specialist. And so as a calling, you're committed to that discipline. You're committed to those patients, and you're committed to doing the very best for them. And in that way, you never know what you're going to be challenged with. I was here in the Bay Area with the Great Fire in the Oakland Hills 30 years ago, and saw so many of my colleagues lose their homes, etc. They didn't leave medicine. They didn't leave the area. They continue to practice. I've been here in the last 4 or 5 years when we've had all the fires in the North Valley. Santa Rosa, Napa, and those areas, and people lost homes, people I know, but they remain committed to their calling and committed to their profession. And that really is what I see in terms of COVID. It's a very mixed emotion. Early on, over a year and a half ago, we didn't quite know all that we know today. What we did know was that people were getting sick quickly. People were getting hospitalized and people were dying. And early on, a few months into the pandemic, one of my groups had the opportunity to talk with one of the DIOs, designated institutional officers at the Montefiore in New York. And she shared with us what their experience was like. I don't know if you remember, New York was one of the early hotspots. And it was just unbelievable, some of the stories that we heard, to go from 6 or 7 patients in a day to literally 200 or 300 in a week and then 1,200 in a month, all sick unto death. And that's what it's been like. And you've got to try to provide care for those patients while also trying to stay healthy yourself, for yourself and your family and your loved ones. And so there are many, many stories of people who either didn't go home for days or weeks because they were concerned about carrying the virus home. There are people who had rituals they would go through when they arrived home, taking their clothes off in the garage, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are all these people out in the public who was talking about it as if though it didn't exist, or as if though it was a hoax. So that was the real sort of mixed picture that we were faced with and dealing with. And some of that has persisted even after and into this fourth surge that we're just sort of on the other side of at the moment. So I would say it's a real call. It's a call to have people get better, to improve, to prevent unnecessary deaths. And that really is what has driven so many of the physicians, nurses, and other healthcare workers.
Dr. Calvin, I'm near the Oakland airport, and they're doing the Blue Angels are doing their flyover. So I hope that I heard you clear. Did you hear him clearly, Dr. Ashley?
Yes, I did. The
thing I'm going to do off script, after that 9/11, when I hear jets coming that close, I was great. I almost ran to the windows and I hope they're not right here. But then I remembered that the Blue Angels are. Yes, Fleet Week in San Francisco, and just to plug out for to San Francisco specifically for the businesses, they're having Fleet Week in San Francisco. It's city because they've done COVID correctness and followed the rules. San Francisco is the only city in America that is having Fleet Week this year. So you go, and that's what sister we were talking about last week. Wait a minute, Mayor London
Reed.
And I'm gonna Dr. Calvin, I said this last week, I'm gonna say this again. If Black women were running this world, it would be a better world.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
I am sure, as a physician that had an interest in helping children, you were just heartbroken to see pandemic hospitalizations increasing as reported on the news over the summer. What was most alarming to you as you saw cases increasing involving children? And what are you seeing or learning as of now that parents may want to keep an eye out for in regard to their children as they return to school and began to socialize again? Thank you, sir.
Yes. So let me put it in a larger perspective first, and then drill down. There have been over 3 million deaths worldwide since the COVID pandemic started. There have been over 700,000 deaths in the United States. And we went from 600,000 to 700,000 deaths in 3.5 months. So the velocity or the increase in deaths has actually increased compared to a year ago. Mm-hmm. And that is concerning. And of course, in the early months of the pandemic, we were pretty much saying and observing that children were not nearly as impacted. And when they did get infected, they did well and tended to recover quickly. That has changed. And now, we're at the point where 130 million cases of COVID-19 have been seen globally, 130 million. And of the United States, which we have about 330 million people, there have been about 185 million people fully vaccinated in the U.S. About 170 million received the Pfizer or Moderna vaccine, and about 15 million have received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So as we know with viruses, over the decades and generations, they mutate. That's how they survive. And not only do they mutate, but they have to also find a host. And a host is whatever person or animal that exists, that they can exist in, and that's how they grow and survive. So as the Delta variant, one of the most prolific infectious variant that we've been dealing with, about 99% of the new COVID cases over the last several months have been the Delta variant. As that has hit, children have become increasingly more impacted. So over these last few months, we've seen more children diagnosed, more children hospitalized, and unfortunately, more children who have died as a result. And of course, because of the guidelines and the research that's been done for the vaccine, children, as you know, under 12 have not been able to be vaccinated, so they don't really have that protection.
Right.
So it has, in fact, to your question, been very concerning about what we have seen and the fact that we know they're vulnerable. We know we have to do all we can as adults and as parents to protect our children. You see advertisements on TV of St. Jude's and various other places that treat children with cancer, etc. Very heart-throbbing pictures and scenarios that you see. And in this case, thankfully not that, but it can be similar. It can be life-ending infections for some children. Now I realize there are not, thankfully, large numbers, and that is great, and that's what we want to see. We like to see no numbers. But overall, it has been bothersome to see the number. And of course, you parlay that into the return to school and the socialization and the coming together of groups. I think parents have to be even more cautious in assessing what kind of environment they are in and what kind of environment they allow and or take their children in.
Wow. Well, you answered that question great, Dr. Ashley.
Absolutely. So, last week we had the privilege of having, Dr. D. Banks, who's an infectious disease specialist, as well as Dr. Noel Harris, who's an internist, and they were really advocating for the safety of the vaccinations for adults. Dr. Wheeler, can you share with us, what your take is on the safety of vaccines for children, especially in light of what Governor Gavin Newsom recently stated his intentions are to vaccinate children K through 12.
Yeah, there, as we all know, there is tons of research being done in almost every country that's around the world that's confronted with and has the infrastructure to do research. And that's Israel, Brazil, all the countries in Europe, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, et cetera, in addition to the U.S. So at the moment, as you know, the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, was first approved for the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And then secondly, it was approved for the Moderna vaccine. And then thirdly, it was approved for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And the first two mRNA vaccines were released as 2-dose based on the research that they had done. The J&J was based on their research, was put out as a 1-injection vaccine. And of course, from the beginning, they began to assess the effectiveness and the safety, which are both critically important as part of research, and various age bands. And so, they looked at folk who are 75 and older, 65 to 75, 55 to 65, 45, 35, 25, and then on down to 18. And then it began research for those who were between 12 and 18. And there has also been research started subsequently for children 5 to 11. So now there is full approval of the Pfizer vaccine for children that are 16 and up. And there is an EUA, emergency use authorization, that allows the vaccine, Pfizer vaccine, and Moderna to be given for children 12 and older. So at this point, the research, I understand, is coming together, and there is going to be, or has been, data submitted as of today for looking at the guidelines for 5 to 11. That data, of course, has to be fully reviewed and scrutinized by the independent committee as well as the FDA and the CDC. And then my understanding is that the dose they're looking at is about 1/3 of the dose of the adult dose for the children in the 5 to 11 age range. That has not been fully reviewed nor approved yet. So obviously, for a K through 12 mandate per the governor, it only can happen as the vaccines are approved for the various age bands. So he can't jump ahead of the science nor ahead of the CDC, the FDA, and the independent scientific investigators.
Thank you.
Dr. Ashley and Dr. Calvin, I'm going to reiterate what I said last week. I am way out of my league here, but I'm trying to hang in there. That's why I keep looking to the side, Dr. Ashley. I'm taking notes. Even though with this show, I can go back. This is some tremendous information here. Thank you, Dr. Calvin. And I'm glad you made every effort to get on the show because this is awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Calvin, what is Lambda, and are there other new variants as of today emerging out of this pandemic? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so Lambda, there have been a few variants that have emerged. At first, back early on in the pandemic, we heard about the UK variant, the South African variant, the Brazilian variant, and they were just called that by the geographic place where they were detected. And then they started to use the Greek alphabet. And so the Lambda variant really is the one that took hold in Brazil. And one section of Brazil, even for the people who had been vaccinated just not long ago, really got swept by the Lambda variant. To this point, I've not heard of any huge uptick in the Lambda variant within the U.S. population. But of course, as any worldwide pandemic, it's so critically important that we observe and understand what's happening around the world, because we have a world now, as we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, that is immediately global. So all it takes is 12 or 14 hours for a group of folk to fly from China to the U.S., from Brazil to Australia, from Australia to the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. So people are very mobile. So the Lambda variant was the one that was detected in Brazil. There also has been some publication talk about a mu variant as well. And I'll take this opportunity to say that as viruses, and there are many kinds of viruses, the coronavirus is, of course, not new. The COVID-2, the virus that causes this corona pandemic, is one of many such viruses that have been around. Of course, this one is unique and different. But what is critically to remember and to know is that, again, viruses, they may take hosts in animals. That's all the discussion early on. You know, did it come from bats? Did it come from wherever? And then they then may translate from an animal to human. And once they're in humans, the viruses use the mechanisms, the metabolic mechanisms that are in our bodies to perpetrate and to change and to keep alive. If there aren't people who are not susceptible to the virus will die out. And that's the whole term about herd immunity, is that if we get to a level where so many people have protection or antibodies that protect themselves against the virus, it will start to die out. At this point in time, you look at the U.S., we've got millions of people who are not vaccinated, so they don't have that protection. And around the world, there are literally billions of people who have not been vaccinated. So at this point, there is the opportunity for the virus to continue to mutate and take up host in many people that are susceptible.
I gotta say this, Dr. Calvin. I see why you in charge. You make the toughest seem like the easiest. I'm ready to go to school now and get my doctor's degree. Dr. Ashley.
Where are we? So, Dr. Wheeler, when we think about children, I know that there hasn't been the approval yet, or it's going to be stage-wise. But for adults, there's been quite a bit of discussion about booster shots. Can you share with us a little bit about what's like the role of the booster, and if an adult elects to get a booster shot, can they mix the vaccination? So if they, for instance, was fully vaccinated using Pfizer, can they get a Moderna booster shot, or should they stick with waiting for a Pfizer booster if it's indicated?
Okay. So first and foremost, important to remember that this is a unique, novel virus, which means we haven't seen it before, this specific strand with the spikes on it, etc. And so I know we hear and we get a lot of questions and discussions that people think, we've got generations or years of experience and knowledge about it, and in terms of how it responds, etc. So I think what is important is that the research that was done starting in the fall of 19, as soon as, like November or whenever it was, when they got the genomic template for it, they began research. And thankfully, the research that's led to the early effective vaccines was built on research that had been done over the prior 10 to 20 years. It was a way of affecting the vaccine based on that research that had already been done. So they researched and they looked at, the early volunteers got one shot, and then several weeks later, a second shot. And I'm sure in the early research, probably those shots were separated by 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. And then the research would draw titers and antibody studies to see what was the optimal time to get the optimal outcome. And so with Pfizer, it was determined that with the dose that was determined to be effective and safe, the interval between them was determined to be 3 weeks. With the Moderna research, it was determined to be 4 weeks in between the first and second. Then the next phase is, okay, once you've gotten that fully, those 2 full doses, what happens with the antibodies that are produced within the immune system? Do they wax and wane? And so that was the next phase of research. As people had gotten vaccinated, the companies continued to follow and see what happened. So over the first 4 or 5 months or so, people were maintaining an excellent level of antibodies. And then they found that at about 6 months forward, those antibody levels started to wane a bit and started to decrease a bit. And that's the discussion. Of course, Israel was very much at the front end of that research and study as well. And they were the first country that came out with a plan to say, you know, there's going to be a need for a third shot or a booster shot. I think those words are sort of interchangeable. And they used the research to say that after 6 months. And so between the research that they had done and the research that the companies were continuing to do, we've heard some reports between 6 and 8 months that it was important to consider to do a third injection to maintain a good, adequate antibody level. And part of that was because of the onslaught of the Delta variant. Now, the current approved medication or vaccine that's been approved for a third shot is the Pfizer. Moderna has not yet been approved for that. So at this point, there is no opportunity to interchange. I think down the line, once Moderna has gone through the review and depending on what the CDC and the FDA comes up with, and that is approved, then the question I expect that they will also give us some direction around is your question around mix and match. So if someone has gotten the full 2 Pfizers, can they get a Moderna? If they've gotten a full 2 Moderna, can they get a Pfizer? That information or guidance hasn't been given yet. The other part of that equation is the Johnson & Johnson. There's also discussion about whether people who got the one-shot Johnson & Johnson might need a second injection of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as well. My understanding is the data for that and the discussion and consideration will probably follow that of Moderna. So we're looking at a few months down the line where they will have the ability to look through and analyze all of that data. So that's kind of the current state.
Thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
I'm still in awe, Dr. Calvin. I'm learning so much here. I'm going to revisit this tape quite a few times before the weekend.
Okay.
Dr. Calvin.
And I know you had Dr. D and Dr. Glenda. They are knowledgeable as well. So you've got some great information.
Well, Dr. Calvin, on the Black Business Roundtable, you will hear the blackusa.news in its entirety. So thank you for helping us get that out to our audience. Dr. D. Banks and Dr. Glenda Newell this was their second time being on the show, and we've had an overwhelming reaction to the information that they have given us, and we are going to have to cut a little short today because we were, with the end time, but we are going to hope that you, because we still have some more questions too, but we were going to hope that you could come back. The questions that you have answered here today are invaluable to people who do not get the exposure. And they look like people who are on the screen, Dr. Ashley and myself, do not get the exposure from doctors and hearing what they should do in light of this severe pandemic, and specifically with the flu and cold season. So, thank you, sir. My next question, due to COVID-19, The healthcare field has lost many members working on the front lines, trying to save others, including children. What would you like to say to parents on the fence and refusing to vaccinate their children that are eligible to be vaccinated, especially in our communities of color? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's actually been a very disturbing experience and observation that I have had over the last many months, and many of my colleagues, particularly Black and brown physicians and providers, have been concerned. And what I would say is, first and foremost, is to take this whole pandemic seriously. The number of people that have died, that have gotten COVID and recovered but have long hauls or COVID long syndrome is also significant. I know a few of those as well. There are many impacts that it can have. And it is so unfortunate. I think the biggest challenge for us in the healthcare profession and caring for patients and providing information has been the politicization of this particular pandemic from its inception. And that has really served as a disservice for, I think, parents, families, and a greater population in so many cases. So at this point, I would ask parents to really think about what it is that they can do to have themselves be as safe as possible, and also have their children to be as safe as possible. Every year we've gone through a flu syndrome or flu epidemic, and it's often said in the pediatric realm, kids are referred to as rugrats. The fact that kids are with other kids and smaller kids are with toddlers, and kids are runny nose and wiping everything on each other, etc. And of course, they bring those viruses home, and the parents get it, and they end up getting a flu symptom. In this case, COVID can be very similar, with the exception that you can get much sicker and actually die from it. Not to say that flu doesn't cause significant illness in some people each year, and it also causes a number of deaths each year. But all in all, we want to do all that we can to keep people as safe as possible, as healthy as possible. And we want to also follow the science in terms of doing that.
Dr. Ashley, do you mind if I get a little greedy and ask a couple of more questions?
Not at all. Not at all.
As you can see, Dr. Calvin, we make sure that we stay in concert while we're doing these great, outstanding interviews with such knowledgeable and intelligent guests who are specialists in the field that they're in. What about vaccinating or not vaccinating for the flu this year in particular? Are you seeing an increase or decrease in vaccination rates for children in Northern California? And has the flu hit any part of the United States as of October 2021? What is the medical community advising parents to do for their children this cold and flu season to maintain their health? Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, so I think, this fall, and we're now officially in the fall and winter, is going to be one of the most potentially complicated fall and winters that we've had. Last fall and winter, we were having these discussions about flu and COVID, et cetera, but during that time, many people were at home, working remotely, and not going out for public gatherings or large gatherings, et cetera. And I think that, it was very helpful that we did not see the usual incidence of flu cases last fall and winter as we usually do. Wow. This fall and winter, I think it's going to be interesting that, many adults and some children are vaccinated, but people are also getting out and about. Kids are going back to school, and of course, and thankfully in California, most schools have some mask mandates, etc. I think that's going to be helpful. In the meantime, it will be important to realize what is the setting in which you're in. And I think for those parents who are informed, before they go to some sort of indoor or close setting, to know what people's status is so that they can know what their vulnerability or what their risk might be. So those are discussions that people are having and should have, that's different than last year and certainly different than years before, because of the potential impact of COVID on it. So I think this year, there are going to be symptoms. There are going to be people who are going to have symptoms of flu, symptoms of colds, allergy symptoms. And the questions are always going to be, so what if is it COVID or not? And so it's going to be the question not only that families will have, but it will be the question that physicians will have as well. And I suspect and expect, and as we saw the last couple of months, the surge of testing for COVID that occurred, because one of the only ways to really know whether or not a child or an adult has it is to test for it in general, because you're not likely to have just the ideal or pathognomonic symptoms for it. So that's going to increase the complication a bit. And those are the things that physicians and nurse practitioners and people are going to be looking for and assessing as we get into this fall and winter.
Thank you, Dr. Calvin. Are you concerned about cold and flu season combined with COVID-19 as children return to school? And what are you witnessing or hearing from your medical professional regarding the health and well-being of children that have returned to school as of September 2021? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so I think, I'm thankful. I've seen a few stories of children. One the other day that was so special. A 12-year-old, he told his mom what he wanted for his birthday was to get vaccinated. So on his 12th birthday, they showed a picture of him sitting at the immunization center getting his vaccine. And so special and so, amazingly long-sighted for such a 12-year-old. Wow. I think that, it's going to be discussions that parents are going to need to have, and parents are going to need to have with each other and with their children in some cases. I suspect there are going to be children in their teenage years who have strong thoughts about whether they want to be or not to be vaccinated. And in some ways, over those last couple of months of this public discussion, I've seen and heard children who have actually had much more germane and measured comments and reflections on the COVID pandemic and its potential impact that some adults have, as we've seen some of the yelling and screaming at school board meetings and within schools settings, etc. So I think that the school return will add to it. And the other part of that, of course, are the other adults in that setting, the teachers, the janitors, the administrative staff, and people that are in the school, whether or not they have the protection or not. And of course, I should say that even for all of those who are fully vaccinated, there is still some risk that they could get the infection and they could spread it to someone else, maybe not become symptomatic at all themselves, or become mildly symptomatic and spread it to someone who perhaps isn't vaccinated, who could get sick and get very ill. So that's all part of the world, so to speak, that we're living in. And now with more movement, both of parents and of children, it just increases that a bit more.
Dr. Asher, I got to ask one more quick question before you, because our parents need to hear. Our audience who have kids, you need to review this tape and take note, because this man is speaking truth to fiction. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Calvin. We really appreciate you today.
You're welcome.
During this cold and flu season, how can the average person tell if they have the flu versus the cold or COVID-19? And does COVID-19 home test work on children? Thank you, sir.
Okay. Yeah, so there are some symptoms that will be, as we say, telltale. For the children who have known allergies during certain seasons, pollen, etc., that they get symptomatic each year, sort of burning eyes, runny nose, sneezing, that sort of thing. When that happens, much more likely that that's allergy related. A child who has a bit of a cough, generally, a little runny nose, much more likely that it's a cold or early flu symptoms. There are some, things like muscle aches, which can happen with the flu, but tends to be much more frequent with COVID. Fatigue is another one, being tired. Tiredness also seems to be a bit more prevalent with COVID than it does just with a cold or flu. Rarely do you have sneezing with COVID, but it's relatively more common with cold and flu. You can have sore throats with either. You can have runny nose with either. You can have fever with either, though fever seems to be more common with COVID than it does others. There are a couple of things that can differentiate. So if the child or the adult has diarrhea or nausea and vomiting, it is more likely related to COVID than it is to cold and flu. And then, of course, the thing that's been talked about a lot in the news over the last year plus has been a new loss of smell or taste. And if you all of a sudden lose your taste and smell, that is more likely related to COVID. Although with the flu, if you've got a really stuffy nose, as we all know, you can also have a decrease in your smell or taste as well. But a distinct loss of taste and smell, generally more related to the COVID. Wow. So that's the kind of thing. So if there are questions, a lot of people, families who have coverage, insurance coverage, the insurance often, or the medical group often provides nurse coverage 24/7. You can call in and review the symptoms that you might have. You might also want to have a good working thermometer at home, because one of the questions that people will ask, does your child or do you have a temperature or a fever? And so you won't know that unless you check it, because you can't go by feeling the skin. So that would be another thing that families should do to have available.
Dr. Ashel, I've been greedy, please.
No, sure. I know we're time is of the essence. So I really want to ask for our parents who are listening. Dr. Wheeler, we're so close, to the holiday season. It's October, and it seems like society couldn't even wait really for us to really get into October before we saw Halloween decorations. Last year, Halloween was definitely minimized, and so there was no trick-or-treating. Can you give some advice for parents or, who may be on the fence about whether or not to take their child trick-or-treating, or how that can be done as safely as possible?
Yeah, so you're right. I think we're seeing lots of Halloween decorations go up in our neighborhood as well. So I think people are excited just that some sense of normalcy returning. So what I would say, a couple of guidelines. Halloween is a big thing, particularly for small children. And it's particularly big for a lot of children who are in the age group who aren't able to be vaccinated yet. So what I would suggest is, if you're going to take children out trick-or-treating, make sure they have their face covering on. Thankfully, trick-or-treating is outside as you go from house to house in general. So I would probably avoid any major big combination of people inside or home at the end of trick-or-treating or during Halloween, unless you know the status of the adults that are going to be a part of that. And this might be also, if you want to do that, one of the cases where I would recommend everyone wearing their mask or face coverings inside as part of the guidelines for that. The other thing is that for adults who would go out to accompany or chaperone children who are going, is to make sure that you would wear your face covering or mask as well, and set a good example for children. The other thing to remember, I know this last year and a half, we've become sensitive about touching things. So if you go from house to house and people hand out, candy or other objects, items, more hands are going to be part of that, into bags, etc. There are some places I've seen over the years where an adult will bring a basket to the door and let kids get what they want, which means more hands go into the basket. Mm-hmm. So for those of you who are considering how to do that, I would suggest that you might just use one hand, one person's hand from that home to give out items to the children, as opposed to letting multiple children put their hands in, which allows for potential for more spread, either flu bug or COVID, etc. Just a simple guideline. The other thing is, depending on where you are and where you live, other items and places that can be touched, doorknobs. And generally, I know that it's generally getting colder, so when children arrive, they generally ring a doorbell, so that's another place of touching. So just to be aware of the fact that we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and touching is one of the ways that sometimes things can be spread. And I think in addition to that, what do you do when you get all your items home? I know for us, for many months, we write down the mail that we get each day from the mailbox, etc. Different people go to different lengths in terms of how they do their home guidelines. Just be mindful of it, and it's just an opportunity at this point to be even more mindful as we approach Halloween. And then secondarily, as you brought up, Thanksgiving, which is a time for people getting together for dinner and families. Again, to review guidelines around who's going to be gathering for dinner, and whether or not people gathering are all vaccinated or not. Obviously, you can require people wear a mask. You can't wear a mask when you're eating. So you need to think about how to do that in a deliberate way to try and decrease the potential. To my knowledge, most family gatherings, people aren't going to have testing like we have when you go to an airport or something like that. So it won't be possible to know exactly people's status. So it's just important to take those guidelines into your planning.
Dr. Calvin Whelan, I think you almost answered the next question. So I'm going to put it out there, but because I do want to reiterate that specifically for the older generation. But you are so precise and concise. You're answering 2 or 3 questions in one. What do you say, Doctor? The upcoming family holidays are arriving starting in just 7 weeks for Thanksgiving and 11 weeks for Christmas. What advice do you have for these multi-generational family gatherings in this new year of COVID 2021? Thank you.
Okay, so I did begin to answer. And the same comments I made in terms of Thanksgiving would be the same for Christmas. Right. The added guideline or suggestion, people tend to travel more long distance for Christmas than often they do for Thanksgiving. Right. And so people coming from around the different parts of the country, sometimes different parts of the world, important to know what the community spread is like from where people are coming. And even though if they're vaccinated, as I said earlier, there is a potential for those people who are vaccinated to actually have and get the virus. It just may not express itself in the usual way, or may not express itself in a vigorous way. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't spread to someone else. And so I think the important thing in these holidays is to be mindful of who's in your home and your household and who's going to be in your visitors listing or group. And if there are people that might have cancer or some other immune disorder where they're, even though they may have been able to get the vaccine, they may not be as well protected. Some may not be able to get it because it's not effective with certain people and certain kinds of treatments, etc. So be very mindful of that. And the last thing you would want is to have a gathering and have an aunt or uncle or grandparent come down sick and die from it. Certainly not worth that. So I would just say to really be cautious and think about all the things that I've said and all the things that are being said by the scientific leaders in the country around these guidelines.
Yes.
Of course, travel, all the precautions should be in place.
Dr. Calvin Wheeler, MD. This has been an amazing, outstanding, awesome show to educate our audience on how to safely navigate through this cold and flu and COVID-19 season in 2021. We thank you for joining and figuring out a way to join when the demons were trying to keep you back. And I believe I've seen you at church. I haven't seen you in a while because of this COVID, but I hope to see you soon at church. And thank you again, sir. We really appreciate you.
You're so welcome. And so happy that you are doing this and have undertaken this great broadcast and a way to inform the public and help keep people healthy. So we appreciate you greatly and appreciate Dr. Ashley as well.
Thank
you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so sorry I couldn't see you, but
oh, you'll be back. We're gonna. I'm gonna come to your house. We're gonna fix that computer because they need to see the man who's spouting out this amazing and important information that can save lives. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Evening.
I'm sorry. Calvin?
Have a good evening.
Okay, you do. Thank you. And we appreciate you making it on the show today. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you to our weekly special guest, Dr. Ashley Coleman, Doctor of Psychology, and Janani Ramachandran, Esquire. You weren't here, but we missed you. We know that you are our grassroots fighter of human rights in Oakland, California. We'll see you soon next week. Thank you again to Dr. Wheeler, MD, for continuing our educational series on cold and flu and COVID-19. Thank you both for your appearance on the show today, and we hope that you will come back and continue to educate our growing audience on issues facing our community. A special shout out to our man, our brother, and the mastermind behind the BlackUSA.News, Donnie Glover, and current sponsor, Magnolia Engineering and Construction. And once again, sidebar, I saw her perform last night. The good old boys were running at her because she is a sister who's making a difference. And sisters are making a difference in trades and careers are non-traditionally for Black women. So congratulations again, Miss Tammy Willis. I'd also like to say, and I want everyone to understand this one, to join our Black Business Roundtable advertising family or to be a possible guest on the show, reach us via email. That's bbrt2021@hotmail.com. We also have a network of shows hosted by Donnie Glover, such as Chap and Friends on Mondays, Party Marty, Let's Talk on Tuesdays, Sister Biz with Nicole and Tamara on Wednesday. Black USA Crypto News with Kamal Hubbard on Friday. So be sure to check out these Black voices and guiding lights of our community. Audience, this has been an outstanding night, and I want to close out by saying, as usual, thank you for tuning in and, wrong ear, listening, learn, and share, because I know you care. This is Doug Blacksher of the Black Business Roundtable. God bless and good night.